Hello and welcome to City Beat, your central source of news and information for the city of Rocky Mount. I'm your host, Tamika Keenan Norman, and today we're talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion. Today, I want to update you on where we are with the initiative, give you a little bit of background on it, and why it's so important for the city to be involved with diversity, equity, and inclusion. We'll also speak with our fire chief and our human relations department because those departments are leading the effort as well. We'll talk to fire about how they're working to create a more diverse workforce and how human relations, the department and the Human Relations Commission are working to involve you, the community, in having conversations about diversity and about race. So stay tuned. More of City Beat is coming up next.
Maria, so how's work?
It was fourth period biology. Our students just weren't getting how easily viruses spread. So Miss Bell and I had them role play a zombie virus outbreak. By the time they had all learned the lesson, all the living were dead. Hey, how's your job going?
That big sales meeting I planned? Next year, I might get to go.
Cool.
Hello and welcome to City Beat. I'm your host, Tamika Keenan Norman, and today we're talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And joining me on the show today, we've got art curator Allison Weidrich, also assistant city manager Tom Moten. So welcome both of you to City Beat. I know Allison is a familiar face, but Tom, I think this is your first time on the show. No, you've been up here before. Okay, well, welcome back. I forgot. Well, thank you all.
Too many shows.
Hey, there you go. There you go. Well, thanks to both of you for being on City Beat today. And I want to start by talking about what is diversity, because before we started training, before we started talking about this initiative, I thought about gender, I thought about race. But how would you all define diversity, equity, and inclusion?
Well, in the context that we're using for this effort, it's really all. It is race, it is gender, it's socioeconomic status, it's religious belief, it's gender, it's what we call all the isms. So age, diversity in terms of recognizing age, military background could be one of them. In terms of workforce, it also is your place of birth. You know, sometimes isms related to that. Oh, I'm from so-and-so versus a native versus non-native individuals, English language as a first native speakers versus those that English may be a second language. So when we think about diversity, we think about all the isms that may exist. And we recognize that it changes over time.
And when you talk about the isms like racism and
sexism, genderism, any of the biases that may exist. You know, in the South we have a favorite saying, oh, well, at least I'm not a Yankee. You know, but of course we love to have people move to our community and become a part of us, so we have to recognize that part of that diversity is recognizing and appreciating people who come from different parts of the U.S. and they bring different perspectives.
Okay. And we were talking before the program started. This initiative started back in 2014. I think you had just came on board with the city at that time.
Right.
Yeah.
The initiative started in the spring of 2014 with Visions. I joined the city in September 2014, so there was a little bit of catch up for me. And if you remember, the approach that was used to really drill down on what were the issues impacting the workforce was a focus group meetings with about 100 employees from across the organization. And then Vision took that feedback to say, here are issues that are in your organization that a diversity, equity, inclusion program could help you address.
Okay. And this is a process. Allison has been involved in that process, a 4-phase process, as a matter of fact. And the first part of that I was involved in, well, I've been involved in it throughout, but the leadership team. And we talked about the tools for diversity and how to be a diverse organization. What were some of the other components of this process that you can talk about?
Well, you know, the leadership team and what we like to call it is capacity building. This is unlike technical training where I can say I can teach you to operate the video camera in 20 easy steps and then you go out and do it. Much of the diversity, equity, inclusion program is about behavior. It's also about organizational culture. It's about organizational policies. It's about organizational practices. So before we could really rush out into the workplace and begin making the changes, the leadership team, which was largely the department heads and those individuals that reported to the city manager had to get a base of knowledge to operate from, a common language, a common framework. From that, and that was essentially about the first year and a half. And in year one, the second element was having a cadre of diverse persons from across the organization, what we call the DIG group, the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion group, and those were individuals that were ambassadors, supporters of the program that volunteered to work. And we called that group down from 65 to 24. Allison was on that group. And so that second wave, if you will, is that group. The third wave, if you will, would be the development of a 5-year plan, which really ran concurrently with first phase and the second phase. Then that fourth leg is really the workforce development and capacity building, and that's really where we are at this point in time. We've got to get the training out to all the employees across the organization.
And you referenced DIG, and also there's an education and engagement subcommittee. I know, Allison, you're very much a part of that subcommittee. Talk about some of the activities that you used with employees to explore diversity. I know one of the ones was we went to Raleigh to the Museum of Natural Sciences for their exhibit, Race. Are We So Different? But talk about some of those other activities.
So the Education Engagement Committee is comprised of initially of DIG members, but then we also opened it up to city leadership team members so that we could be more inclusive. And what we do is we provide information, whether it be articles or activities that assist the DIG group, CLT, and maybe in the future the larger organization to better understand diversity and have a more open conversation about all the isms. So one of the things we did, one of the first things we did, I think, was we suggested watching Zootopia, which was a big hit with the DIG, and it sort of talks about diversity in a way using animals, so it's a little bit easier to talk about than maybe something as challenging as race, gender, etc. So that was a lot of fun. We also provided reading material for another DIG group meeting where we picked a couple different articles and then had conversations about those articles, what your feelings were about it, how it changed your perception of your colleagues. And then, of course, we went to the race exhibit in Raleigh. That was the most recent one we organized. And that was really interesting. It brought the DIG group and the city leadership team together. And we not only got to go on a really fun field trip, but we had lunch. And so we all got to sit down together and have a meal, which is a great way to get to know one another.
And during that exhibit, I learned so many different things. It was really interesting. But how do you come up with these ideas, these different activities?
Well, it takes a team. So the Education Engagement Committee is comprised of not only myself, but also other members. I think right now there's probably about 6 or 7 members in the Education Engagement Committee. And we all sort of come together, brainstorm ideas, provide our insight. The great thing about the group is that, we're all so different and diverse that if one person has an idea, there's probably someone else in the committee that can be a good counter to it. So sort of give you a good idea of how other people will react to an opinion, a thought, an article. So it's a collaborative idea there. So.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
And the other thing that we've developed is the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Plan that has been rolled out to the employees as well. But how will this whole initiative affect the community? Why is it so important for the community?
Well, if I can go back a couple of steps, Allison is on the Education Engagement Committee. One of the components of developing this system of change is it needs to be sustainable. So there was a concerted effort to create a variety of committees that took on responsibilities, because initiatives that are trying to be sustained by 1 or 2 individuals tend to fail at some point in time. So we had a logistical committee that did all the support for all of the educational sessions. The DIG group probably had a total of about 8 or 9 educational sessions. We also worked with Visions. We had a leadership, we have 3 tri-chairs. So I'm a tri-chair. There's 2 other individuals, Kim Batts as well as Negrita Silver, that are tri-chairs. We had executive committee, which was comprised of different individuals. That was one working group. We had another working group that was the Welcome and Connect, so new people coming in and off the board. So in total, there were about 6 committees. So that structure's got to be amplified to serve the broader workforce. moving forward, when you say, well, how does this initiative translate into service or impact the community? I think first and foremost, we have to recognize that our community is diverse. You know, at times, you know, we can say, well, all of us are alike, we all come from the same background. But clearly, North Carolina has grown over the years, as well as Rocky Mount, and the population demographics are different. And so as a consequence, when we have a workforce that can recognize and appreciate the differences that we all bring, perhaps how we approach citizens could improve the interaction. If you remember, under Chief Moore's leadership, they did the unconscious bias as a training for the police department to help them recognize that to some degree within our diversity and equity, we also recognize there's some degree of unconscious bias that we all bring forward in our interactions. So being more aware of it could enable us to become more effective interacting with the community, communicating with the community. Sometimes we know when we see an issue in a community, we may assess and judge the condition based on our biases. So becoming more aware, we may be able to understand and see things a little bit differently, which could put us in a better position to help the community and others identify solutions that will meet that need. And then I think at the end of the day also, we have to remember our employees are also part of the community. Many of our employees live and work in Rocky Mount, and so to some degree, when we say, how does this affect our community, our workforce is our community.
That's very well said. And considering that, can you ever put a time frame on this? And Allison, I'd love for you to speak to this as well. Can you ever put an end date to a diversity, equity, and inclusion initiative? It's always changing, always evolving, right?
Yeah, I think there's no end date to it. I think it's an ever-evolving situation, and you have to continue to get better forever. I mean, this is not only a cultural change that we want for our organization, but I think being more aware and being inclusive, equitable, and diverse is important for everyone across the country to know. I mean, this is a never-ending, always going to be changing initiative.
You know, and along those lines, you know, our program is focused on multiple levels of change. So the first level of change, and this is in the, as we go through in your learning, we call them workshops. It's about personal change. And so that's me. You know, what do I need to look at myself in terms of how I relate to others who are similar and dissimilar to me. Then we talk about interpersonal, the dynamics between you and I. You know, how can we make that better? It reminds me of, you know, when you go to functions, and you may see sometimes historically in organizations, all the people from one department sit together, all the people from another department sit together. But what we've noticed after we began work on this is that when we all come together, we're seeing people from different departments sit together. So to some degree, they're beginning to appreciate their differences by this process. So you've got interpersonal as a second level. We talk about the group organizational change that needs to occur. We talk about the institutional change, which is policies. And then the hardest really is cultural change. And so all of those levels have to be change and growth in order for us to continue to be able to achieve what we want to be as a diverse organization, one that appreciates our distinctiveness, if you will, as well as one that is inclusive. And so you say, well, how does that work? You know, I can't tell you over the course of my career, and I've been in city management in the manager's office for 20 years, how many times I've heard, of course, when we're interviewing for candidates, well, you know, someone that's really from our part of the country would be better able to understand what we want. And to some degree, we don't recognize that that is a bias to some degree.
Right.
Because oftentimes there are non-natives that bring a perspective that helps move us forward. And at the same time, some of us non-natives have to appreciate the native person's perspective about history in their community. When I came to Rocky Mount, people said, well, you don't really understand, you know, the distinction between Edgecombe and Nash County. So I have to be willing to say, yeah, let me look at that and get appreciation for the history. So as we started this initiative, we really spent some time looking at the history of Rocky Mount as an organization and its involvement in human relations, race relations. And it makes me proud to say that our city government, our city fathers, began this process of addressing race, equality, and equity nearly 40 years ago, since the Civil Rights Movement. Has it been perfect? No. But the fact that we have a community that recognized the need to focus on those issues, that's why we have a Human Relations Council that's been in existence for since the late 60s. So it's been thrilling to be a part of it, but there's a lot of work to be done. Again, the changes have to happen at multiple levels simultaneously, as well as some of it happening as we continue moving forward.
Yeah, and it's interesting you mentioned Human Relations Commission, because Archie's going to come on a little later and talk about that, and having conversations in the community about diversity, about race, and all those things, because those are needed conversations.
Right.
They really are. Anything else you all would like to add?
Well, you know, I think for me, one of the most thrilling aspects of being involved in this effort has been, it gives me an opportunity to work with individuals who I think are immensely talented from different parts of the city that I really would not have had the opportunity to work with them at this level. And so for me, it's been really enriching. I think of them as dear colleagues and friends. I've learned a lot through the process, and I've seen them grow as leaders in an area outside of what I would call their technical expertise. And so I'm really proud of the work that our team has done and the effort they put into it. I liken the work that they've done to some degree to building infrastructure. It's in the ground. If you don't build it, you notice that the water won't flow, the plumbing won't flush. But most people don't appreciate the infrastructure. They only look at the things above ground. But there was a lot of work for the first couple of years that was infrastructure building. So now we're looking at the structure. This is the workforce beginning to see the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Initiative. Wouldn't you say, Allison?
Absolutely, yeah. I think one of the most important things for me being on DIG was learning the cross-cultural communication skills. That's always the thing that I come back to when people ask about DIG, because I think having tools to enter a conversation, especially a difficult conversation, that both parties can sort of agree on, helps bridge that gap. And that's probably the best takeaway that I can get from DIG. And it's also just nice, wherever I go in this city, I'm almost guaranteed to know someone no matter where I go.
Right.
Because I know people from every department now.
Yes, it's a great cross-section of the organization.
Yeah.
You know, Allison touched on a good point. You may want to give some examples when we say guidelines for cross-cultural communication. You know, one of the things that we know is that you have to have agreement among the parties to follow these guidelines. But what are some of the tips that we use, those sort of phrases that we use that help us?
Yeah, so one that I like is I focus, that instead of using we whenever you're talking about a subject, you say I, because you can't really speak for the group, you can only speak from your own personal perspective. Another one is both and. Using the word but sort of negates what you just said and ignores what maybe someone else said. That's a great idea, but
Right.
And so I think both and is a great way to have very integrated conversations with people. What's a couple other ones? Those are the two that I always stick out the most to me.
Well, confidentiality.
Yes, confidentiality. So whenever you're having a conversation with someone, to keep secrets and to be honest and trustworthy. I think that's another one. Trust and be trustworthy. Or try on. That's a good one. So if someone has a different idea than you can try on that perspective.
Yeah, and that's a hard one for people to grasp because somehow they think trying on means you're trying to change me. And so when there's a point of disagreement amongst a cross-cultural group, we're not saying change your attitude or change your behavior. We're simply saying for this moment, let's just set aside that and let's try to take this position or posture. And it's very powerful. You want to talk about impact and intent?
Oh yeah, impact and intent is a great one, because whenever you're talking to someone who has a different maybe cultural perspective than you, if you're saying something, you might not have the impact that you intend to have with someone, and you need to respect that. So your intent may not be the same as your impact, and to take ownership over that, and I think that's very powerful for both parties to understand that, if someone has hurt you, that you have the responsibility to say, this bothered me and this is why, and you can acknowledge that wasn't the intent, but that was the impact. So
that was a pretty interesting concept in our sessions, because how many of us in our personal lives at home have had a conversation with a significant other or a parent? Well, I didn't mean to do this. Well, I didn't intend to do this. If you find yourself saying that, then you have to recognize at that moment, whatever the transaction and communication was, the impact was different than your intent. And so what we've learned is that when we try to defend what our intent is instead of recognizing the impact, you can't really move forward in building a relationship. And so acknowledging the impact is important. Defending the intent negates the person's feelings. Another one is it's okay to disagree.
Yep.
What about that one?
It's okay to end a conversation saying, we don't agree on this, and you don't have to go any further than that. I don't think anyone in a conversation really needs to give up their own personal beliefs. You can agree to disagree and move on from there, as long as no one's getting hurt.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And there was one more, and it's probably a little bit more complex. It's sort of, process and content, conversations. Oftentimes we get locked into some conflict because the disagreement is not necessarily on the process, but on the content or vice versa. And so we really have to be locked in on distinguishing between how we go about doing something and then the content of what we're going to do. Those are potential areas where conflict, particularly amongst people who come from different backgrounds. We have maybe within our own. I have my own way that I'm comfortable speaking. Just like family members, I can use a lot less words because I know they kind of understand me. And when you move out and communicate with other people, you use more words to make sure that you're clear. And so, I think those kinds of tools and practicing it. We've done role plays before. We've read a book together, which the leadership team read. But it's really important, and it's really important.
Good catch.
Which is the making the most of change, which is leading through transition. And so we really talked about how what we're undertaking is in essence not just a change, but it's a transition. It's moving from the old way of being and doing to this new way of being and doing. And that area in the middle before you get there is really where we've called it more or less comparable to the Egyptians, the Israelites being in the desert, so you have to remind people that here's where we're trying to get to, which is the promised land.
And that change takes time.
Yeah.
It takes time. It's changing your mindset of how you typically do things. So it does. I've enjoyed the process myself, and some of those guidelines I've been incorporating not only in the workplace, but at home too, because you have to think in the broader sense as well. My husband and I always say, at times, we agree to disagree.
Exactly.
There you go.
Exactly.
But thank you both for being on the show today. I really got a lot of information from this segment, so thank you so much for being a part of the show.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for tuning in as well. Coming up in just a moment, we'll speak with Fire Chief Mike Varnell to talk about how his department is incorporating some of these same tools to create a more diverse fire department. It's right here coming up next on City Beat.
Hey, you.
Yeah, you. Getting that college education? What are you gonna do? Graduate and take some office job? Be like everybody else?
Or will you dare do something different?
Like, be a teacher. You could be my teacher. You got the skills.
The smarts?
Yes, you. You could be the teacher I never forget.
That'd be cool.
Does that corporate job even have recess? What are you gonna make of yourself?
What are you gonna make of me?
Hello and welcome back to City Beat. I'm Tamika Keenan Norman, and if you're just tuning into the show today, we are talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And one department involved in this initiative is our fire department. And joining us today is Fire Chief Mike Varnell to talk about the efforts that you all are using to make your workforce a little bit more diverse, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Well, hello. I think this is your first time on City Beat, right?
No, I think I've been on before.
Oh, with me?
Yeah.
Okay, well, I guess I forgot. Well, welcome back. Welcome back. Now, how long have you been with the fire department now?
I've been in the fire department 28 years.
Wow, that's
Yep.
a long time. And
Yep.
fire chief?
Fire chief, 3 years.
3 years.
Yep.
It doesn't seem like it's been that long.
It doesn't.
Yeah.
The time flies when you're having fun.
There you go. Now, when you first were employed as fire chief, you had diversity as a challenge for your department initially. So tell me a little bit about how many employees you have with the fire department and the breakdown, the racial breakdown.
We currently employ 152 full-time employees. And our breakdown is we have 21% African American, 1.3% Hispanic, and 77% Caucasian.
Okay, within that
That's
department.
our current breakdown.
Okay. What would you like to see? What's your goal for that department within maybe the next 2 to 5 years?
Well, it's kind of hard to put a number on it, and everybody tells us we don't really need to look at numbers, but we need to look at quality and that type of thing. So what our deal is, we put together a strategic plan for recruitment, and our goal is to follow those goals and objectives we set forth, and that will increase our diverse applicant pool, therefore giving us a better chance to hire more diverse people, making our department even better. So.
And I know you say you don't look at the numbers, but this is a challenge throughout the state, not just with your
it's a huge
department.
challenge in North Carolina and the U.S. Currently, as I said, our African American numbers are 21% across the state. The 20 largest municipal fire departments, the average is 9.5%.
Okay.
And across the U.S., it's 8.4%. So we're over double both those numbers. We're not where we need to be, of course, but we're working in that direction. I mean, but we're doing very well. As far as the state goes, we are number 2 in the state, only behind Winston-Salem in diversity numbers. So fire departments, fire chiefs are calling us and coming to see us and wanting to know what are we doing in that regard. So we're able to share some best practices, some things we're doing, and learning quite a bit.
And some of the things, because you talked about your diversity recruitment strategic plan to council in the fall, and one of the issues that you had with minorities, African Americans, is that sometimes they left information off of their application.
That's correct.
Which meant that they had to be excluded from the process. And so what you talked about were not only the issues, but some action steps to help those folks.
Right.
In regards to the application process, what have you come up with to kind of help potential applicants?
It's kind of odd. You think, what would somebody leave off an application packet to be discarded? But when they don't bring in their driver's license, proof of driver's license or driver's license history, or they don't bring in a high school transcript to prove they've graduated from high school or GED. Simple things you think that would be easy to bring, but in the last 2 processes, we've lost 77% of our applicant pool for that reason, for not completing the complete application packet. So what we've done is we're tweaking our process a little bit. We're going to require just a basic application up front. Before we had all that information that had to be submitted with the application. Now we're going to do a basic application, and then we're going to meet the people that want to continue past the application phase. We're going to meet with each one of those and help them, let them, tell them how to get a transcript, tell them how to get a driving license history, those type things, and assist them, hopefully making that applicant pool much, much larger.
Okay. So is this something you're going to do, or you've already started the process?
We've already started the process, so this next hiring process, that will be in place.
All right. And typically, when do you have hiring processes, or does it vary?
It varies. Typically we run one a year, but it always depends on retirements and disabilities and that type of thing. All those variables play into it.
Okay. The other portion of your hiring process is a strength and agility phase, right? So what does that entail?
That's 8 different events, and they're kind of, they mimic things that firefighters would do on a fire scene. They're not hard. They're not complicated. They're very basic skills, but we have to measure if a person is strong enough to lift a ladder, or can they balance a ladder, are they afraid of heights? Because if you're afraid of heights, the fire service is not for you, because you're going to have to climb a 75 to 100-foot aerial. And if you're afraid of heights, and we've seen people on the 3rd, 4th step, they just lock up and they can't do it. So we have to find out in the initial stages. Claustrophobia is another big thing, and a lot of people don't think they're claustrophobic. Everybody has a little bit of claustrophobia in them, and if you're claustrophobic at all, the fire service is not a good career to choose, because you have to go in a lot of tight, dark spaces where you cannot see. You have to use your other senses. You have to wear a self-contained breathing apparatus that's very close to your face and very confining. So if you're claustrophobic, we need to find that out, and that strength and agility is some of the things that we test in that strength and agility. It's 8 different things. They're all available on our website. They have been for some time and still are. There are videos for each section, and it explains what each one does. But what we're doing, a plan of action for that is to, in the past we've had open houses where we've set that up and let people come run through it. Not a lot of interest. What we're going to do now is every quarter of the year, whether we're running a process or not, we're going to have that strength and agility set up and let interested people come down and go through it, look at it, practice the different skills, and ask firefighters how's the best way to do each one.
Now, during the actual phase, when you're going through the actual process, does it take one day? How long is it?
It's typically from start to finish. They come in and do vitals, make sure they're good on physically, and then it takes about an hour to do from start to finish.
Okay, and they're wearing gear like a firefighter.
They're wearing fire gear, right? They don't have breathing apparatus, but they do wear gear.
How heavy is that gear?
That gear, everything combined with the self-contained breathing apparatus, everything's about 60 pounds.
Wow. So that's a lot to be able to do that with that gear on.
Yes, and it holds the heat in, your body heat in, so it's a different feel. It's not just like going to the gym with with a t-shirt and shorts on.
Right,
You've
right.
got a lot of added stuff.
Okay. The other thing that you do is your panels interview and your chiefs interview as
Correct.
well, part of the process. Tell me a little bit about the types of folks that you have on those panel interviews.
Well, the first one is the panel interview, and that's really a cross-section of our work company. We have a basic entry-level firefighter on that crew. We have a fire engineer, a fire captain, and then we have a human resource professional. So that's a full-person panel. And those people know what we're looking for. They have a set of questions, of course, that have been approved by Human Resources, but they get a good feel of what the people coming through the process, how they're going to do. And they rate them, they score them, and then they send them to the chiefs panel. And it's not a set score. It's not a pass-fail. It's just if they think they have a chance, they'll send them to us. If they don't, that's where their process will end. But about typically, last couple of processes, about 60% of those people pass on to the chief's interview.
Okay.
And that is another panel of four chief officers, different ranks, battalion chief, division chief, assistant chief, and myself. And we don't score ours, we just want to talk to them, get to know them a little better, and kind of, put some pieces together.
And I'd imagine, even for me, when I did the assessment center here, even though it wasn't in the fire department, it can be intimidating to go in to a panel interview.
Right.
So what tools are you equipping prospective employees with to kind of help them through that phase?
Right now, as we speak, we're talking with both the community colleges, Nash and Edgecombe, and the OIC, because they offer those kinds of services, those kinds of classes. And we're trying to line up some interviewing skills classes for interested people. And we think that'll help them kind of, what to wear, how to present themselves, and just kind of get rid of some of those nerves, hopefully. And then we're going to set up some mock interviews with our firefighters to interview these people, so that won't be their first time. So they'll kind of get some of those nerves and some of that tension that they may have been a first-time interview.
Okay. So you said this was phase one of the diversity recruitment strategic plan.
Right.
So when can we look forward to phase two?
It's probably going to be late spring. We're working on that plan now. And that plan is going to have a lot to do with succession planning, promotions. We're going to look back at the last 3 years of our promotion processes, look at the results and the data from those processes and see how we did, how successful were we in the different races. We look very hard at career development. We're very strong with career development. We have a plan from firefighter all the way to assistant chief, what you need to do to promote to each one of those things. And we look at those plans every year. We review them, make sure they're good and valid. But we're all about continuous improvement. Status quo is not a thing we use in the fire service, so we're always trying to continually improve every process that we have. So that plan will be a lot about succession planning and where we're going in the future. It'll be just very much like the first part. It will have a lot of goals and objectives, time-sensitive accountability centers for each one. So it'll drive us to be better.
Okay, and you usually have promotions about once a year?
Typically once a year, we do.
All right, anything else you want to add? Are there any tools that I did not mention?
Well, we're doing a lot of things. We're doing a lot of things. This year we're doing something new. Well, CIAA tournament has a vendor spot where they let people come in and recruit, promote their businesses. So we're going to go there and recruit this year. Obviously, we're recruiting the high schools with the firefighter certification program. We've got a brand new Explorer program we're getting ready to roll out in the high schools. We're looking at middle schools for mentoring. We're still active in our Williford Leadership Council at Williford School, our Boys and Girls Club. But something interesting we done this past week, we went to Fayetteville State University.
Hey, I'm a Bronco.
They had a very nice public safety forum on diversity and inclusion for public safety, fire, and police. And they had experts from all across the country in diversity and inclusion. And it was really neat to see, because we want to go in and kind of measure up and see how we're doing. But the things that those specialists were telling people to do, we're already doing, or they are in our recruitment strategic plan. So it really validated the things we're doing and shows us that we're on the right path. And then we get a lot of interest from other fire chiefs and other fire departments to say, hey, how's Rocky Mount doing? Your numbers are good compared to us. What are you doing in those regards? So it's good to validate what you're doing and always try to continuously improve.
Well, thank you for everything. Thank you for being on the show today as well.
Glad to be here.
All right.
And we're looking forward to some good results.
All right. And we're looking forward to having you come back to talk about phase two a little later as well. All right. Thank you for tuning in also. And coming up in just a few moments, Archie Jones is going to join us on the show today to talk more about diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts from his department, Human Relations. This is City Beat.
Got a quarter?
Hello and welcome back to City Beat. I'm your host, Tamika Keenan Norman, and if you tune into City Beat all the time, you'll find out that we do a lot of shows on parks and recreation. But this time we're doing a little something different. We're talking about something serious, and that's diversity, it's race, equity, inclusion. And joining me today, someone who handles those serious issues quite a bit is Archie Jones, our Director of Human Relations. So hello and welcome to City Beat, Archie.
Hello, how you doing?
I'm good. I think this is your first time on the show with me, right?
First time.
Well, welcome. It's about time.
Glad to be here.
Now tell me, for those who don't know, a little bit about what your department does.
Well, the Human Relations Department is responsible for addressing a wider range of issues in the community. You know, when people feel that they have been mistreated, treated unfairly, our department has authority to have those conversations with both parties and try to work out a solution to move forward. It could be employment, it could be housing, it could be community, neighbors, anything across the board.
Okay. And your department works very closely with the Human Relations Commission.
Correct.
So tell me the purpose of that commission and how you all work together.
Well, actually, there was a commission before there was a department.
Oh,
Back in
okay.
1968, the community felt it very important, we needed a commission or a group of people from diverse segments of those communities to help the community move forward during that time. And so the commission was started first. Out of the commission, the staff came along. And so the responsibility of the staff is to support the commission. The commission's dues and goals are to promote harmony, respect, and goodwill among all the citizens in the community. Pretty much is to make sure that, try to address issues within the community that sometimes can cause small issues that can cause large issues. A lot of times there's a lack of understanding because a lot of times if we don't understand why a group of people do certain things or individuals do certain things, we may act differently. But once we can discuss it and get a better understanding, that helps us move forward.
So definitely essential to have that commission, to have your department. We appreciate all that you do for the city as well. Now, one of the things you were tasked with recently is to start having conversations in the community, involving the community in discussions about race, about diversity. Why were you tasked with that?
Well, our council, we have a very forward-thinking city council, and our community is unlike any other community across the state of the country. You know, we have some issues. So the council felt that this is a good opportunity for the city or community to address those issues, to kind of get a jump on it, as opposed to waiting until something happens and then we create a event that really has a negative effect on the whole community. And when you're talking about different beliefs, different understanding, and different groups of people, and that brought it back to the Human Relations Commission, being able to get those different groups of people together, allow them to voice their opinions, and tell why they believe a certain way. Now, we aren't going to always agree, but the thing is to have that conversation and to allow everybody to know why someone feels the way they do. Once we get past that, and hopefully collectively, the community can move forward.
Exactly. So you're being very proactive versus reactive,
Exactly.
in other words. Yeah. So recently you presented a draft proposal to council about these conversations and about some other objectives that you have in mind to explore this with the community. Can you talk a little bit about what's included in that draft proposal?
Well, that draft was pretty much a format of how the commission felt that if we were going to address it or take on this issue, there's some steps that needed to take place. And those steps are to identify different groups of people in the community that would need to be a part of that conversation. Also part of that draft was the members of the commission needed to partner with, we call them stakeholders in the community, and have those meetings and facilitate those meetings throughout the community. As a part of that, the commission also realized that they themselves need some training. So right now we're in the process of trying to identify some methods to train the commission to prepare them to start that process.
Okay, so we're taking steps
Taking
and moving
steps.
towards the right direction. Now, let me ask you this. One of the things that I've learned going through these workshops with visions and speaking with others about diversity, equity, and inclusion is that it is certainly a process, right? It's not
That's a
something that you
process.
can put a date on. Is that going to be the same with these conversations?
Same here, because whenever you're dealing with different groups and different beliefs and different understanding, you really don't know how deep the process is until you start it. Once you start it, you know, you may talk about a topic to one group may be simple, but to somebody else may be more really involved. So you really can't put a timeline or a time frame on how long it would take to work through that process. We hope that if it's done properly and correctly, the community will have a better understanding and respect for each other. So when we face those difficult challenges, we may not all agree, but because we have a better understanding, we can move forward.
Okay. And one of the things that I forgot to mention that you all do that deals with diversity, one of the events that you have is the International Festival of Cultures.
Correct.
Tell folks a little bit about that festival, and it's ironic because it's coming up soon, too.
It's coming up. We're probably about 4 or 5 weeks away. We're getting phone calls of people that want to participate. I like to tell people you can come in that 4 or 5 hour time frame and go around the world. Rocky Mount is blessed to have so many different nationalities to call this community home. And that's an event that we allow those different groups to come out and help the community get a better understanding of why they eat certain foods, why they wear certain things, why they act or believe in certain things. And that's a part of that, getting to understand differences. And when you understand someone's viewpoint on something, it makes it better.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Archie. Anything else you want to add?
Well, again, you know, the International Festival is open to the community. It's a free event. The more people that participate as our community grows and as we try to make this a pleasant place for people to call home, events like this are very important.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us on City Beat. Thank you for tuning in as well. And thanks to all the others who joined us on the show today to talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And you'll be certain to hear much more. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Tamika Keenan Norman, and this is City Beat.